Today I'm here with Steve Witkoff, founder and CEO of Witkoff, one of the largest real estate development and investment firms in the country. Steve's company has acquired and repositioned more than 18 million square feet. He has been fortunate enough to own some of New York's most iconic properties, from the Woolworth Tower to the Daily News Building, and he's developed projects such as 111 Murray and the Edition hotels in New York and Times Square, as well as West Hollywood. Steve joins me now. Welcome, and thank you so much for being with The Real Deal.
My pleasure.
You know, you started off as a lawyer, as any good Jewish boy would, and then that wasn't really for you, right? What happened? I mean, that was a good life. It was a comfortable life. I know you were working really hard, but you're probably working just as hard.
Yeah, no, I enjoyed it, and as I look back today, I'm thankful I had that background because it taught me to think a lot more incisively. I think today I'm more appreciative of having practiced law than back then. But I practiced at a firm by the name of Dreyer Traub, and that's actually where we represented the president at the time, Peter Kalikow, Integrated Resources, the File family, Arthur Cohen. So it was a who's list of real estate entrepreneurs in the city of New York, and you couldn't help, if you were a young lawyer, wanting to do what they did.
To be on the other side of the table.
You
right?
It was right in front of you. I mean, every day you were representing these swashbuckling guys who were entrepreneurial in their spirit, and they felt like the rock stars to me. You know? So, on the other hand, they were also doing big deals, and I didn't have a lot of money.
Sure.
So I couldn't aspire to buying the sorts of real estate that they were buying. So I sat and dreamed about it for a couple of years.
And then you met a gentleman, you knew a gentleman by the name of Larry Gluck.
Yes.
And one of you had a beat-up Buick?
I had the beat-up Buick, and Larry had, it was either a Pinto or some sort of beat-up Honda.
Okay.
He had, his car was in the equivalent beat-up status as my car was.
So you guys decide, hey, let's try this property business out. And you start cruising the streets of Harlem, which is not the Harlem we know today.
Correct.
And what's happening? What's the process? You're just driving around looking for buildings to buy?
Well, Larry was a partner at the firm at the time. I was an associate, and I knew Larry had bought 2 buildings in Brooklyn, and so we were introduced. And we began, in those days, you could look up in the New York Times, they would advertise real estate deals in a classified section. So we would look up these properties, and at night after we practiced, and I mean at 10 o'clock at night, because that's the sort of days we worked, we would go out in one of these beat up vehicles, and we would drive up, you know, to these neighborhoods where we could afford to buy a piece of property. And in those days, Freddie Mac had a program. They were doing commercial loans. Okay. And at Dreyer and Traub, we were representing developers who were using the Freddie Mac program, but in places like Queens and Long Island. So we had talked to the Freddie Mac correspondents, knew that they would lend up in the Bronx and Washington Heights, and that's the reason why we began patrolling those areas, because it jibed with our game plan, which was buy a building, but it's got to be cheap enough for us to buy it, because we collectively didn't have a lot of money.
But these buildings, I mean, they weren't necessarily cream of the crop buildings, right? There was a lot of work you probably had to put in. I remember reading that you spent one New Year's Eve with a plunger fixing a sewage problem.
I did. No, I learned how to do it all up there. But you know, the tenant. It was I look back, it was a magical time in my life. Larry and I would go up, you know, when we ultimately left practice, we would go up, look at our properties, and then we would go to Arthur Avenue in the Bronx, and we would go have an Italian meal. Those were some of the best days of my life.
And then you talked about, so 96th Street is sort of the traditional boundary between Manhattan and Upper Manhattan, and you spoke of it as being somewhat akin to a Maginot Line.
That's what I called it, the Maginot Line.
Right, so when did you breach that line? When did you go over and say, okay, this is time for me to make a play at Manhattan, the Manhattan of my dreams, of my youth?
We breached it, and I can't remember who the broker was, but we breached it when we bought the property, the apartment building on West 81st Street, and we bought it from Al Dwarman.
Okay.
And of course, he was a legend to us because Al was he owned a bank, and he was a very, he was a prominent real estate person. So we bought that building, and we thought, oh my gosh. I mean, I remember we pinched ourselves. I don't know how much it was. Maybe it was around $5 million. And we pieced together some equity capital and put the debt together, and that was the biggest deal of our lives. We thought, wow, we really hit it.
And then at some point, you decide to take on bigger and bigger deals. And at some point, you make a play for the Woolworth Building, one of the most famous buildings in the world. I believe the tallest building in the world at one point.
Yes.
How did that come about? How did you meet Ruby Schroen? And you've had a long relationship with him. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, Ruby was a Dreyer and Traub client. He actually helped Larry and I get a line of credit for $250,000.
Okay.
In the, I want to say it was the late 80s, maybe very early 90s. He introduced us to somebody at Sterling National Bank. And Larry and I, we didn't have real financials, so it was amazing to us that we could ever get a line of credit, right?
Okay.
We actually got it. And so we kept up in contact with Ruby, but he was operating in a sphere above us. But Larry and I began buying defaulted mortgages from Freddie Mac in the early 1990s. We would invest really almost every nickel of our cash flow and plow it back and buy. And Ruby was one of the few guys we were bidding with in those days. Okay. Bidding against him at times and teaming up at times. And we formed a friendship with him. And that's how we came together and decided to buy the Woolworth Building together.
I want to get into that, but I think you said something about putting every nickel back. Now, that's something that is hard for a lot of people to understand. You see real money for the first time in your life. How do you resist, okay, let me take a big chunk of that out and buy that house or buy that car or college fund or whatever, and instead say, I'm going to bet the farm again and again and again. And each time the stakes are getting higher. You're getting older. You have more to lose. How do you? What's the mentality? Are you missing like the safety gene, or what's going on?
No, actually, we were making cash flow every day from the buildings, and the market was not going up, and people didn't understand these neighborhoods, and they were fabulous neighborhoods, and we were fixing these properties, and we actually got a really good feeling out of it. So we knew we were buying intelligently. Remember, in those days, we were buying at 2 and 3 times the gross rent. Today, people pay 10 and 15 times the gross rent. So we knew we had an opportunity to buy a business being that apartment building that was then added to our existing business. We had an opportunity to buy a business that was right then and there cash flowing.
Okay.
And so it was much more about the personal sacrifice. All of our friends were buying apartments. They were all getting shares in the Hamptons. They were all doing things for their personal life with their money, and Larry and I were reinvesting. In fact, I remember, and if he watches this, he'll laugh when he hears it, when he remembers. But I remember we both decided, wow, I think it's time for us to go out and spend some money.
Okay.
So you would normally think, so what is that going to be? What we decided to do is we saw an ad in the paper that Mercedes-Benz was running a promotional to lease a Mercedes-Benz 300E. And they would lease it at $300 a month.
Okay.
So Larry and I went into the Mercedes dealer and we bargained with the Mercedes dealer to lease 2 of them. So they would give us a slightly better price than $300 a month.
Let's talk about Woolworth now. So you establish a relationship with Ruby, and then you decide to make a play at this building. By far the biggest deal you've done at that point. How did that come about?
1998.
Right.
Venator was selling it. They were the successor company to Woolworth. And we called Ruby on the phone and we said, boy, let's go buy this building. I think we paid $152 million for it.
Okay.
Can you imagine the first deal that me and Larry bought, which was 164 Sherman Avenue? We paid $220,000 for that building.
Right.
And now we were going to buy a building for $152 million. Now, mind you, with Ruby and other partners, some really great guys, Ulu Barad, who has since passed away, may he rest in peace, Sam Dome. So we Abe Fruchthandler. So it was a sort of consortium of people.
And these are longtime partners. I think they still work together. Fruchthandler and Schroen.
They do, and so do we.
Right.
And we all maintain this friendship and did a bunch of things together on top of that.
And another maybe a different kind of partner, but more swashbuckling, more out there, is Howard Lorber. You've dealt with him for a long time. He's worked on projects. I think you guys are doing the Addition together, both here and in West Hollywood, as well as the Toy Center building that you guys did together.
Yes.
He's a partner on 111 Murray as well. What was that like? How did that happen? I believe there was a car sharing story involved in that.
Well, so I was at Dreyer and Traub, and I remember that Howard used to pull up to Dreyer and Traub at 101 Park Avenue. He used to pull up in this cream-colored drop-top Rolls Royce, and he had this mane of hair. And I used to come out sometimes, and I'd be in my Mo Ginsburg suit with my button-down, my shirt that was frayed at the top and probably had blood stains right here. It was frayed because I had maybe 3 of them. And there would be Howard pulling up in that cream-colored drop-top Rolls Royce, and I thought to myself, wow, oh, what a life, right? Like, who wouldn't want to, like, now, I'm not the Rolls Royce person. Never had one. It's not my, it's not for me, but Howard looks great in it.
Okay.
And so I remembered him in this car. And I left law, and now it's, I want to say, late 90s, 98, 99, and I'm driving down Fifth Avenue, and it is this driving, pouring rainstorm. And there's Howard outside of, I want to say, Cipriani, trying to hail a cab, and the rain is, he's getting sloshed by the rain. And I recognized him immediately because, remember, I had this image of Howard Lorber in the drop-top cream-colored Rolls Royce. And I pulled over and I said, Howard Lorber, would you like a ride? And he looked at me nonplussed, had no clue who it was. And I said, Steve Witkoff, I used to represent you at Dreyer and Traub. I'll give you a lift. I gave him a lift, and we kept up contact, and that's how the friendship and the relationship started, right there.
He's on the Park Lane Hotel as well, right?
Yes.
That is obviously something I do want to talk about. That is one of the most important assets that you've ever bought, and you had big plans for it. They didn't quite come to pass.
Right.
Was it the scandal that really threw everything off with Joe Low and the 1MDB money laundering scandal, which became a global scandal, but it all came back to this property? I think it's been featured everywhere in television, front page of the New York Times.
Yes.
Were you actually going to go through with that plan to build condos there?
Oh, sure. We were all geared up to do it. I was quoted. There was a story recently about it, and I was quoted in the New York Times, of Charles Bagley's story. And I said, I think my quote was something along the lines of, we woke up and were faced with these circumstances that we couldn't imagine would ever happen. Because who could imagine it would ever happen? Now, Joe Low hasn't been accused of a crime. It's right now a civil action, so I don't want to comment on that side of it. But a civil action that involves a money laundering complaint and a kleptocracy complaint essentially meant that we were frozen. And so it had to get resolved.
Would you regret that deal, the way it all came to pass? Because that would have been, I believe that would have been your most ambitious condo project by far, right?
I don't regret, I don't think we made a mistake there.
Okay.
I think it was a well-conceived project.
But when you got this partner involved, how much vetting happened? How much due diligence?
We vetted him like we would vet any other partner. We did a background check. We called up people he did business with. He was being banked by Goldman Sachs. He had done business with the Blackstone Group. All of the lenders in the lending stack KYC'd him, which is commonly referred to as a Know Your Customer report. So everybody who was involved in this handled themselves responsibly. Okay. It would have been impossible, as I look back, to have had the sort of international platform to have done an investigation that would have come up with. I mean, no one knew that this had ever existed. This circumstances of this situation. Remember that 1IMD, which was the sovereign wealth fund in Malaysia that everybody talks about, had then just finished a bond offering through Goldman Sachs.
Right. They were blue chip as it comes.
And that's how we had read it. Right. And so we'd like to think that we responded responsibly, ran the property correctly, did what we were supposed to do, managed it correctly, and I think we have a solid asset today.
One of the things you mentioned before, you've talked about this before this whole scandal really blew up on the Park Lane, which is you had second thoughts about launching sales or moving forward with the redevelopment of the condos at the time. Did you see something in the market that gave you pause, or was this already a function of troubles that were going on with Joe?
Not really. No, we had sold 150 Charles. We had sold it in 12 weeks.
And that did very well, I believe, is one of the
Yeah.
most successful projects downtown.
Yeah, we sold it at significantly north of what our pro forma was. We then came into the market on 10 Madison Square Park West, sold it significantly north of what the market was.
Are you sold out at that building?
By both buildings.
Okay.
And then we came into the market with 111 Murray with the Fishers, and we had a pretty high velocity of sale, high rate of sale. It's probably the best-selling property in downtown Manhattan.
Where are you at
today.
now in terms of sales?
In and around 75%, in that sort of range. We never expected that the market was going to have the velocity that it did when we sold 150.
Okay.
That was a very unique time in the marketplace. There wasn't a lot of supply there. The Park Lane is an incredible site. It's a one and only site. It's next to Fifth Avenue. We would argue that it's the best site on Central Park South, but if it's not, it's certainly number 2 next to Vornado's. 2 big sales just happened at 520 Park Avenue, the Zeckendorf property, the Vornado building, 220, is selling very successfully. Related is doing very, very well with its sales right around the block from here. So I think that there's a real market out there.
So what are some people doing wrong? I mean, some people have come in and either had to abandon their projects, haven't been able to get financing for their projects. Has that ever been a concern for you, construction financing?
No, because we put in significant equity and we build well and we plan well. We're very, very focused on the scoping out of plans, because the largest risk in a development deal is always the schedule.
Okay.
And if you don't plan correctly, you have schedule changes, and that's where you really get hurt. And we have a very healthy respect for risk, because it's my completion guarantee, and I'm the one signing, so I'm very, very concerned about that.
And so this kind of scrutiny on your business hasn't happened since, I would say, in the late 90s, when there was this front page article about you in the Wall Street Journal. There was a profile of you in the Observer. It said, Steve flew too close to the sun. He's probably going to get burned. I don't believe you got burned in any real way. I know that things were tight, things were close. You were very leveraged. You were playing a game that you don't seem to be playing at the same level of risk as you do. But how did you get out of that spot in the late 90s when all that press and all that scrutiny was happening over your business?
Well, I really wasn't in a spot. And that's what's so interesting, that there still is this sort of misnomer. So we had, the Wall Street Journal came to us and said, boy, you've got a big portfolio. We had close to 10 million square feet of office space in the city of New York. We'd love to do a front page story. And if you study that article, and I can tell you that we're not big to promote ourselves. It's not what we do. It took you a long time to get us here today, right? And so, but they said they wanted to do a story about how we had started. So I thought that was going to be a good story. Maybe it was going to be inspiring to other young people like me who always dreamed of being in the business. And I took them at their word. Summer of 1998, the Russian bond market collapsed and the CMBS market collapsed. And the Wall Street Journal decided to turn that story into a story about leverage. And so
you
they
became
were
the poster
interviewing me.
boy, right?
I became the poster boy for the leverage story. So I said to the Wall Street Journal at the time, do you understand what the underlying basis of Larry and my portfolio is? And they said, no. I said, so let me tell you what it is. We own this office portfolio at the time at $90 a square foot. That's what we bought it for.
Okay.
90.
That you're taking the sum total and you're...
Yeah, at $90 a square foot. We owned 156 William at $20 a foot. We owned 1 Broadway at $45 a foot, the Daily News Building at $82 a foot, 33 Maiden Lane at, I want to say, $70. I mean, they were incredible buys. Sam Zell, an equity office, had just bought Worldwide Plaza at $280 a foot.
Okay.
He had 50% leverage at $280 a foot. We had 85% leverage at $80 a foot. Where would you rather be? 85% leverage at $80 a foot or 50% leverage at $280 a foot? What no one wanted to listen to, because they were driving towards a story, is that we couldn't lose our portfolio. How in the world could you lose a portfolio leveraged when you owned it at $80 a foot, when smart guys like Sam Zell had just bought a piece of property at $280 a foot.
Do you think it's
That's how deep our cash flow was. Our cash flow was huge. There was no possible way to lose the property. So, but that's what they wanted to turn it into. And then on top of that, what they loved and what became part of the story was that I was licensed to carry a gun. So then they turned that into the pistol packing guy who went up to the Bronx.
Right.
That was, I'm not great with, I don't have a thick skin. So for me, it was much about.
You don't have a thick skin, you're saying?
I don't.
Okay.
So it was
you
much
like
about,
people to like you. You've said this before.
I suffer from
Right.
I suffer from wanting to be well liked and the fear of failure. I don't want to be another newspaper story.
There's a quote that I want to read you from your friend Adamski from First Boston back in the day.
Bill, may
he
he
said,
rest in peace.
He said, you talk about burning a candle at both ends. If there was a way to burn it in the middle, Steve Witkoff would figure it out. He doesn't stop. There was a reputation that you had of sort of rolling with this cast of quintessential New York characters like Bo Dietl and so many other people that were such colorful people. I guess the first question is, were those stories about you exaggerated to a point? Did the wildness stop, or was it never that wild to begin with?
I was never wild. Everybody knew that about me. Yeah, no, everybody knew
So
that.
how does this perception come up?
I was the guy. First of all, Bill Adamski, who's a good friend, we were born on the same day. What he meant was that I was obsessive in my business. I was. I knew how to plumb. I knew how to paint. I knew how to put up sheetrock. I learned it all. And my business was what I was about, and my children. And so I gave my oldest son, Andrew, who I lost, a bath every single night. I was home every night to give him a bath. But, Bo was colorful, so he would go on the Imus show and he would say, I was out last night with Joey Pots and Pans and Stevie Real Estate. Steve Witkoff never went on the Imus show, but Bo went on the Imus show. So, from that came this whole colorful thing.
You're a New Yorker. You've been doing deals here since you started. Suddenly, you're not very active here anymore. You've got ongoing projects, but I think the moves that you've been making, the big ones have been in Miami, in South Florida, Los Angeles. Are you not seeing opportunity in your hometown?
Not that much.
Okay, so what is it about the LA market that's really interesting you right now?
Well,
you've got the Santa Monica project, which is a big, probably potentially a large rental project you're doing.
Yes, it's a market rate rental with an affordable component as well. And then we're doing something else in West Hollywood, and both of those jurisdictions are very, very tough to get entitlements from. So that's the reason why those markets are interesting, because they're tough to build in. They're tough to get entitlements, and yet we have those entitlements. We're able to build, and we bought both of those projects from a land standpoint at a solid basis. In New York, the land prices that we paid for those projects, and by the way, the economics are very similar to what we'd get in New York, the land would be double here.
Okay.
The cost of construction would be significantly more here.
But isn't it sort of a nightmare to get those permits and everything going in LA?
It is. It's
so
very
you see that as an opportunity because you know it.
That's right. That's the thing that we embrace, that sort of thing. The difficulty in getting entitlements.
So when would you come back here? What are you looking for?
Well, the land is elevated, right? And so, we have expensive land. It's expensive to build. And people are now talking about mansion tax. And, things like that have a chilling effect on the marketplace. I don't understand that, by the way.
They do for a minute. So Vancouver just had this, they introduced this foreign buyer tax. Home prices fell, and now they've rebounded. I just read a story yesterday in the South China Morning Post that prices had dropped as soon as sales had stalled, and now they're back. So that was a temporary blip in the market, but everyone absorbed that tax, and things continue.
Well, but Vancouver's not New York City, and New York City already has elevated prices, and we've got a substantially, and we've got a larger affordable problem than Vancouver. I give you the following analogy. You're a member of a country club. Everybody, 80% of the membership, or even 90% of the membership, lives in that local town. They pay dues, they write the initiation fee, they do all those, they write all those checks that are necessary for that club, that golf club to run. You now have an opportunity to get 20 international members. They're going to come there and play golf 3 times a year.
Okay.
They're not going to really use the facilities, but they're going to write the initiation fee, they're going to pay the dues, pay the food minimum. Do you not take those international members? Every club in the United States takes them, assuming that they're of good reputation.
Right.
So why you would penalize a foreign buyer who buys the top of my building or Gary Barnett's building or Steve Ross's building or Harry Macklow's building and say to him, we're going to disincentivize you from coming to New York and making the decision to buy. We get it that if you come here, you can stay at the top of the Four Seasons. You can rent the best suite and come here a couple of weeks a year and own that suite at substantially below what it costs to own the top of one of those buildings. So now we're going to disincentivize you from doing that. Now, when that person pays for the top of that building, he pays for union labor. He subsidizes the cheaper apartments in the building that might go to New Yorkers who live here. He subsidizes the 421A tax certificates that developer bought from an affordable guy who put up affordable housing in the Bronx. And so that is the ecosystem that exists in the building business, but no one wants to talk like that. You have people.
It's politically unpopular, right?
So it's politically. It's exactly what Donald Trump says. He says it's politically not correct to talk like this. It's politically not correct to say that that this helps the building of affordable housing. No, what's politically correct is to say that guy's a rich guy, so what we ought to do is tax him. And all that you do is create a disincentive for him for the next guy not to buy here.
One of the programs or mechanisms you've taken advantage of is the EB-5 program. You've raised hundreds of millions of dollars through that for multiple projects.
Yes.
It is now, it is in place till September, but it is now facing sort of a spotlight that it hasn't seen at this level before. That probably stems from the incident that happened with the Kushner companies in New Jersey, where the whole association was made with President Trump and the family. Where do you see that program going? And if for any reason it's diluted or phased out, what other options do developers have?
Do I think they'll change it in some respects? Yes, I think they'll probably increase the requirement, the dollar amount, from 500 to 800 or $1 million, something of that sort. For the life of me, I don't understand what all the noise is about.
Okay.
Every single time we've raised EB-5 money, we've been successful. We've created the jobs, we've built the project. So that's what the program is supposed to be about. Now, some of the criticism is that it's being used in places like New York.
Not just New York, but luxury Manhattan projects. I don't think New York is itself the issue. If you were building housing in the Bronx or Queens, that would be one thing. But this is, you're not building
it sort of begs the question, right? If you were bringing an EB-5 offering for a Motel 6 in Iowa, would that be subscribed to? And I bet it wouldn't. I go to China, I do the EB-5 raises, and my own opinion is that it wouldn't get subscriptions. So that's my view. But EB-5 has done plenty of good things. It was the capital that did the platform for Related. Related was not going to get financed on that platform.
It's an unusual project.
That was an infrastructure platform, and EB-5 generated that platform. And that platform then generated tremendous jobs and generated the condition precedent pursuant to which they put up multiple office buildings that got financed and apartment buildings and paid all kinds of tax into the city's coffers. I want to say this. What's the alternative to EB-5? A mezzanine lender who's lending at 2 times the rate that an EB-5 investment pays. And so who are you helping? You're helping the hard money lender? I mean, that's what I don't sort of understand. I mean, all these projects, the only thing that would happen on these projects is that they'd all get built and they'd get built more expensively.
You have been a longtime business associate of our current president. You also consider him a friend. When I remember you told me when we had a long conversation shortly after he was in office, and we talked about. I said, this rhetoric is troubling. The kind of stuff that he says. Basically, if I were coming in now, it would be harder for me to
as an immigrant.
Yes, correct. But you said, look, just separate the rhetoric of this guy and the hot-headedness and sort of the direct action from what he's going to do. All right? I said, okay, let's wait. We're about 100 and change days in. He is involved or sort of enveloped in multiple crises, many of his own making. Do you still feel as confident in his leadership right now? And my second question to that is, Do you not feel like all this international turmoil, if you looked at what happened with Qatar yesterday and the GCC and all the sort of the regional disputes that he's now taking credit for, do you not feel that sort of stirring shit up, if I may, is going to have an impact on your business and an impact on this economy in a negative way?
I actually think that he's doing a really good job. I say it all the time, he's a risk manager. He, and you couldn't pay me to do his job. You just couldn't. But he's doing it, and I give him a tremendous amount of credit for persevering through a lot of this. I'm not sure the crisis that you're talking about. I don't think that the Russian thing is anything but a lot of hot air.
Okay.
I don't think the Comey thing means anything.
His own staff is talking. There was a story today about Sessions offering to resign. There's been.
I understand, but that's a story. So, but let me go right down the line. Comey's going to testify.
Okay.
But the number 2 guy at the FBI actually came out and said not one person from the administration ever called us up to look to interdict that investigation. But nobody wants to write that story.
That's been. I mean, I read that. So you read that as well, right?
The Russian story. To me, unless you believe that he called the Russians up on the phone and said, "Please hack into the Democratic computer because I think I'm going to win the primary," when in fact, by the way, he didn't know that he was going to win the primary in those days. I just don't believe that happened.
Okay.
The Kushner story, I think that
the back channels you're referring to.
Yeah, I think Jared Kushner ought to be celebrated for leaving a billion-dollar or multi-billion-dollar family business and actually serving this country. I think he ought to be celebrated. I worked in the Senate. I think at 35 years old, it's not something people do at 35 when they're sitting on top of a business of that magnitude. He goes to Washington, and since time immemorial, we've had back-channel communications. That doesn't mean illicit communications.
Okay.
Henry Kissinger was an ambassador without portfolio because people can't officially have conversation at times. So they need to do it unofficially.
What about the other side of the equation, though? So we're talking about these scandals, and yes, we are still in a phase where we don't actually know what happened. So let's put that aside for a minute. He is going to the Middle East. He is talking to country. Qatar is a huge investor in the U.S. Massive. I mean, they own some of the most trophy assets across the country, here in New York as well. He is suddenly taking credit for essentially causing this row, in a sense, if you looked at his tweets and what he said later. Do you think that level of international turmoil is good for your business? You have to, if you're not going to concede on the scandal, you have to concede the world is in flux in a way that it hasn't been in a long time.
I know this is going to sound disingenuous to you, and maybe even to people who listen to this, but I don't care. I really don't care. So my business is affected. I got asked this question about 1031 exchanges at a conference I was attending, where someone said, well, if the tax law changes, then they eliminate 1031s. Doesn't that hurt the real estate business? And I said, so what? I mean, it's not about, I just don't think that I don't want to think selfishly about my business. I've had an amazing life, so I don't make as much money. That's almost irrelevant to me.
You've got your boys in the business now. Alex is working with you. He's I believe on your acquisitions team. I am curious. People know Steve Witkoff, the partner. People know Steve Witkoff, the mentor. What about Steve Witkoff, the father/boss? Are you as good a boss as you need to be with Alex?
I am. I have Alex and Zach.
Right, Zach as well. Right.
So we opened up the public hotel last night. We did it with Ian Schrager and Zach. My son took Barry Sternlicht around, showing him all the rooms there, and he was in a blue suit, but he had heard that Zach was there for the last month, working till 10 o'clock at night, making sure air conditioning systems were right and the rooms were delivered correctly. And so that was me being the tough boss to Zach. And I'm not a control freak. I'm really not. I don't want to be the like some sort of old boxer. I don't want to be the person who stays in the ring for the rest of my life. I've had a great run. Things are great. I've got really bright kids.
You can't speak in the past tense yet. I mean,
No, I'm not.
You just turned 60.
No, I'm not.
But you're still living the life.
No, I am, and I have great people in my life. But what I more mean to say is that I have some partners in my business, They're the younger generation. I have my kids coming up. I don't need to stay around till I'm 80. Hopefully I'll live till I'm 80. But I don't need to stay around till I'm 80 and not turn it over to them. And that's how I speak to my children. And that's how I speak to, I have a partner, Scott Alper. It's how I speak to him. You guys go do this. Like, get me to a place where I don't have to work as hard every single day. And I think we're getting to that place.
Do you want to be a global company, or do you see yourself as a U.S. developer? I know you've dabbled here and there in other markets.
We could go global if we wanted to. You know,
Is
we're plenty busy. We're plenty busy now. But we've got, you know, we just hired a young man who was the best friend of my oldest son, and he's a great addition. So we've got a good, solid team, and my kids are smart. Alex is exceptionally smart. You want to discuss economics? Go sit with Alex. He is the economic think tank in our organization. So
is going public still in the car? I know you had talked. You had mulled this back in the day, right? You had talked about
way back when. Yeah, but I mean, not for me. It's not. Maybe for them. What I dream about is honorary chairmanship.
Okay.
I sit back. People call me up. Have you seen this condition before? What do you think? You know, a little bit more relaxed.
Steve Witkoff, thank you very much.